The scan showed a tumor the size of a golf ball pressing against her daughter's spine. 6 weeks later, a second scan showed nothing there at all. The doctors called it unexplained. Her mother called it exactly what it was. An answered prayer. Her name was Naomi Reyes, and her daughter, Isabella, was 7 years old when the headaches started. At first, Naomi and her husband, Marco, assumed it was nothing more than normal childhood complaints, too much screen time, not enough sleep. But when Isabella started losing her balance, stumbling over her own feet on the way to the kitchen table, and then began having trouble gripping her crayons the way she used to, Naomi knew, the way mothers simply know, that something was wrong. They lived in a modest house outside Fresno, California, where Marco worked construction and Naomi worked part-time at a daycare so she could be home with their 2 kids in the afternoons. They weren't wealthy people. They didn't have much saved for emergencies. But they had raised their children in church, taught them to pray before meals and before bed, and Naomi says now that nothing in her life had prepared her the way that faith would for what was about to come. The MRI results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. Naomi remembers the exact chair she was sitting in when the pediatric neurologist, a careful, kind man named Dr. Patterson, sat down across from her and Marco and explained, as gently as he could, that Isabella had a tumor near the base of her brain, pressing against her spinal cord, large enough and positioned dangerously enough that surgery carried significant risk, and that even with treatment, the outlook was uncertain. I need you to understand the seriousness of this, Dr. Patterson said. This is an aggressive growth pattern, and given the location, we're limited in how much we can safely remove surgically. We're going to do everything medically possible, but I want to be honest with you both. This is going to be a very difficult road. Naomi remembers Marco's hand gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt, both of them too stunned to speak, sitting in that small office trying to comprehend that their 7-year-old daughter, who had been dancing around their living room to cartoons just days earlier, was now facing something neither of them had ever imagined having to face. They told Isabella as gently as they could that she was sick and that doctors were going to help her get better. Isabella, in the way only a 7-year-old can, simply nodded and asked if she would still get to go to her cousin's birthday party that weekend. Naomi says that question broke her heart and healed it a little at the same time, a reminder of how much innocence her daughter still carried into a situation that had already broken her parents completely. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, specialist consultations, and impossible decisions. Isabella underwent a partial surgery to relieve pressure and begin treatment, but doctors were clear that the remaining portion of the tumor was too risky to fully remove, and that ongoing treatment would be needed to manage what was left, with no guarantees about how Isabella's body would respond. Naomi and Marco's church family surrounded them almost immediately. Their pastor, a soft-spoken man named Pastor Ruben Alvarez, organized a prayer chain that stretched not just through their own congregation but through churches across the county, people Naomi had never even met committing to pray for Isabella by name, every single day. Naomi herself barely left Isabella's hospital room those first few weeks. She slept in a chair beside her daughter's bed, the same way so many desperate parents had before her, and every night, after Isabella finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted from treatment and pain, Naomi would kneel on the cold hospital floor and pray the same prayer over and over, night after night. Lord, I am not asking you to explain this to me. I am asking you to heal her. You made her. You know every cell in her body better than any doctor in this hospital does. Please, Jesus, do what medicine cannot do. Heal my daughter. There were nights Naomi admits her faith felt paper-thin, stretched by exhaustion and fear until it barely felt like faith at all. She remembers one particular night, about a month into treatment, sitting on that hospital floor, so tired and so afraid that she could barely form words, when she simply whispered, I don't have the strength to pray a strong prayer tonight, God. I just need you to hear my heart, because my heart is begging you to save her. Marco, working what shifts he could while also splitting hospital duty with Naomi, found his own faith tested in a different way. A practical man by nature, he struggled more visibly with the uncertainty, at one point admitting to Pastor Alvarez that he didn't know how to keep believing in miracles while watching his daughter grow weaker by the week. Pastor Alvarez didn't offer him easy answers. He simply sat with him one evening in the hospital cafeteria and said, "Marco, you don't have to feel strong for your faith to be real. Sometimes the most powerful prayers are the ones prayed by people who are barely holding on. God isn't waiting for you to feel confident before He moves. He's just waiting for you to keep showing up." Marco held on to those words more than he let on. 6 weeks into treatment, Isabella was scheduled for a follow-up scan, a routine check to measure how the remaining portion of the tumor was responding before doctors decided on the next steps. Naomi says she remembers that morning with unusual clarity, remembers sitting in the waiting room holding Marco's hand, both of them praying silently, having stopped trying to prepare themselves for either outcome because neither of them had any strength left to brace for bad news anymore. Dr. Patterson came out almost an hour later, and Naomi remembers immediately noticing something different in his expression, something she hadn't seen in any of their previous conversations. He looked, for lack of a better word, stunned. "I want to show you both something," he said, guiding them to a small viewing room where he pulled up Isabella's scan on the screen beside her earlier images for comparison. "This is the original scan, showing the tumor and its size and position. And this," he said, pointing to the newer image, "is today's scan." Naomi stared at the screen, confused at first, waiting for him to point out where the remaining tumor was. But there was nothing to point to. The area that had shown a visible mass just weeks earlier now appeared completely clear. "I don't have an explanation for this," Dr. Patterson said quietly. "I want to run additional scans to confirm what I'm seeing, but based on this image, there is no visible remaining tumor tissue. In over 15 years of practicing pediatric neurology, I have never seen a case progress quite like this." Naomi says the sound that came out of her in that moment wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughing, but somewhere painfully, joyfully in between, a release of 6 weeks of fear breaking apart all at once. Marco simply sat down in the nearest chair, put his face in his hands, and wept. Follow-up scans over the following months confirmed what that first image had shown. Whatever remained of the tumor after Isabella's initial surgery was gone, with no medical explanation for how or why treatment alone would have produced results so complete, so quickly, in a case doctors had described as unpredictable at best just weeks earlier. The following Sunday, Isabella walked into church on her own 2 feet, a little thinner, a little more tired than she used to be, but smiling the same gap-toothed smile she'd had before any of this started. Pastor Alvarez asked Naomi and Marco if they would be willing to share, and this time, unlike so many hard nights in that hospital room, Naomi didn't hesitate. She stood in front of the congregation that had prayed for her daughter by name for 6 straight weeks, held Isabella's small hand in hers, and said simply, "I don't have the medical words to explain what happened to my daughter. But I don't need them. I know what I prayed for every night on that hospital floor, and I know what that doctor showed us on that screen. God did what medicine could not do. He healed her." The congregation rose to their feet, many in tears, a room full of people who had faithfully prayed for a little girl many of them had never even met in person, now witnessing with their own eyes the answer to those prayers standing at the front of their church, healthy and smiling. Isabella is 9 years old now, healthy, active, back to dancing around the living room the way she used to before any of this began. She doesn't remember much about those weeks in the hospital, but she remembers, vividly, all the people who visited her, prayed with her, and brought her stuffed animals and coloring books to help pass the time. Naomi still gets emotional telling the story, even years later. "I used to think I needed to feel strong to pray a powerful prayer," she says. "I learned that God doesn't need our strength. He just needs our honesty. Some of my most desperate prayers, the ones I could barely get out through tears on that hospital floor, were the ones He answered most completely." If you are praying for a healing right now that feels far too big for the doctors around you to explain, if the diagnosis feels heavier than your faith can carry some days, please hear Naomi's story and hold on to it. God is not limited by what medicine can or cannot do. He is not intimidated by scans, by statistics, or by impossible odds. He is still, today, in the business of doing what no doctor can. Keep praying, even on the nights your faith feels paper thin. Keep believing, even when your voice shakes saying the words. Sometimes the miracle is already happening before the next scan even confirms it.